fireman and one-time chairmaker from the Lower East Side. There had never been anyone quite like William M. Tweed. Over 6 feet tall and nearly 300 pounds, he was surprisingly nimble and graceful on his feet. Caricatured by his Republican opponents as a vulgar, hard-drinking Irishman, he was in fact a fourth-generation Scots Protestant, unfailingly courteous and nearly teetotal. He was also a superb politician who took care of his mainly immigrant constituency, providing jobs for the unemployed, coal in winter, and orphanages, hospitals, and shelters for the poor.
He was one of the first people who saw the power of mass politics in the cities. And for all his thievery, there was the recognition of mobilizing this mass of people to some political end. I think he's not remembered for that. He's remembered for the $50 million that he stole, which if you wanted to get the equivalent today, multiply times 10.
Accelerating New York's already explosive growth still further, Tweed and his associates brazenly siphoned off staggering sums from the hundreds of city projects under their control, and helped robber barons like Jay Gould and Jim Fisk make off with still more. There were lucrative contracts for grateful builders who happily paid Tammany's leaders enormous cash kickbacks to get them. There were thousands of jobs for Tammany's loyal constituents who gratefully voted Tammany's leaders back in power. New York's upper classes, meanwhile, professed to be appalled, but quietly looked the other way as real estate values in the city skyrocketed. It all worked like a machine, a political machine, and no one knew how that machine worked better than William Tweed, who by 1870 had concentrated more power in himself than anyone in the city's history.
It was Tweed who helped maneuver the money through the city council, or the Board of Aldermen as it then was, for the Brooklyn Bridge, for Central Park, for a lot of the road repair and the creation of streets and avenues in uptown Manhattan. Now, he made a lot of money with that, and it was absolutely corrupt.
Tweed's first position was Commissioner of Public Works. He was no fool. And if you know where the sewer lines are going to go, and if you know where the new street extensions are going to be opened up, and you get there first, and you buy up that territory, all you got to do is sit back, wait, and boom, the price explodes. So Tweed, in fact, became one of the largest real estate owners in the city.
I think there was something in him, some overpowering appetite that he could never slake. He couldn't have one mistress, he had to have two. He couldn't have one roast beef, he had to have four, you know, and he couldn't have two judges, he had to have them all, you know, and finally it caught up with him and destroyed him.
In 1870, as newspaper editors and indignant reformers began questioning where Tweed's lavish lifestyle came from, all eyes turned to the still unfinished county courthouse on Chambers Street, a special project of Tweed's. Begun in 1858, it was supposed to have cost $350,000. 12 years later, the price tag had reached $13 million and kept right on rising.
Somehow this one building, which is actually quite a nice building, wound up costing more than the entire Houses of Parliament. Well, you know, the deal was straightforward. We want to buy a lot of chairs. How much does that chair cost? Let's say $5. No, says Tweed, you don't mean $5, you mean $50. Oh, I do? All right. And, you know, give me the chair, $50, you know, 20 back for you, and so forth.
Even the most worldly New Yorkers knew that something had to be done. People begin to tire of holding their noses, George Templeton Strong wrote, and are looking about in a helpless way for some remedy.
No caliph, Khan, or Caesar has risen to power or opulence more rapidly than Tweed I. 10 years ago, this monarch was pursuing the humble occupation of a chairmaker. He now rules the state as Napoleon ruled France. There is absolutely nothing in the city which is beyond the reach of the insatiable gang who have obtained possession of it. The New York Times.
In 1869, a German-born artist named Thomas Nast, with close ties to the Republican Party, began publishing a series of political cartoons in Harper's Weekly. Week after week, Nast relentlessly excoriated what he called the Tammany Hall ring. There was Peter Brains Sweeney, the city treasurer. Mayor Abraham Oakey Hall, Tweed's puppet in City Hall. Richard Slippery Dick Connolly, the comptroller. And Boss Tweed himself, whom Nast depicted as a licentious, balding, overfed monster, literally devouring the city. I don't care a straw for newspaper articles, Tweed declared. My constituents don't know how to read. But they can't help seeing them damned pictures.
He was the object of one of the most successful campaigns by a political cartoonist in history. Thomas Nast really did the most extraordinary job of attacking Tweed and exposing the Tweed ring in Harper's Weekly. Those pictures will live forever. The way you can never separate Nixon from Woodward and Bernstein, you can't separate Tweed from Thomas Nast. They're wed together for the rest of history, I guess.
On July 8th, 1871, the New York Times joined the fray, publishing excerpts from secret courthouse records obtained from a disgruntled city official. Tweed had cheated out of thousands of dollars in kickbacks. The figures were astonishing. 11 thermometers had been purchased for $7,500, dust brooms for $41,000. One contractor had been paid $5.5 million for window shades, carpets, and furniture. It would never be clear how much Tweed's corruption had been exaggerated by the press. The New York Times put the final tally at almost $200 million. But in the end, it didn't matter. New York needed a villain equal in scale to its giant park and giant bridge. And Tweed fit the bill, in part because he simply looked the part.
He ended up a sad, tragic figure because he basically took the fall for a system. And the system involved the bankers, the so-called respectable people, the Goulds and Fisks and all those guys who were not really indicted for the things that Tweed ended up taking the fall for.
On December 15th, 1871, Boss Tweed was indicted on 3 counts of fraud and grand larceny, and 2 months later, 220 misdemeanor charges. He was sentenced to 12 years in prison, and though the convictions were later overturned, a civil suit stripped him of his assets and forced him into prison. Gaunt and ailing, he eked out his last years in jail. In the winter of 1875, he somehow slipped past his guards and escaped to Spain, but he was quickly recaptured and returned to prison. The Spanish police, it was later said, had recognized him from one of Thomas Nast's cartoons. On April 12, 1878, he died of pneumonia in his cell in the Ludlow Street jail he himself had built, penniless and broken.
He gets a lot of the blame, probably that belongs to a lot more people, a lot more people who we think of as legitimate politicians. There are other bosses that had a smoother style. I think part of the reason that people remember Boss Tweed so much was that he was so flamboyant, and by the time his downfall, he was such a leftover from another age.
A villain of more brains would have had a modest dwelling and guzzled in secret. His successors here will not imitate him in this, but that he will have successors, there is no doubt.